Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today, we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This video will be our first in kind of setting up the series again with the new set of Wilds of Eldraine coming in, where we look at this video will be standard best of 1, we'll get to standard best of 3, and then we'll, as soon as the data comes out for the other formats, Explore, Historic, and Alchemy, we'll cover those as well. So if you'd like to get your weekly kind of installment and kind of trends in terms of what's happening in the meta, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And then it's always appreciated if you could drop likes and comments. So Wilds of Eldraine came out on the 5th. It is currently the 9th of September, so 4 days in. It's still a little bit early, so always kind of be mindful of that. As similar to with like the sneak peek video that I did earlier in the weekend on Friday. The decks that were good in the previous meta are still putting up results for the time being. So if you're short on wild cards, if you're waiting, you want to kind of give it another week, as things start to normalize, as more games kind of come in and we get a better idea in terms of performance. So like the old stock mono red is still the highest win rate deck, then followed by mono white humans. The focus of this video, I'm really going to just kind of look at decks with new cards in them and just seeing what's kind of working out with the new cards themselves. So I'm going to include some deck lists as well that don't have high win rates, but more just for informational purposes to kind of say, like, you know what, people are trying this isn't working for this week. As always, we get the data from MTG, what you see on the screen, aggregates like your win rate, users' win rates, and then gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. Link is in the video description if you want to get started with Untapped. I'll paste all the deck lists, timestamp them, so you're good to go with that. So we're going to start off with looking at the meta kind of distribution. And ignore the May 30th, we're looking at popularity of the day. So these are the decks that people are playing, and then we'll focus on like the win rates of the decks themselves. So mono red is clear and favorite, the most popular deck, 15%. Generally at the beginning of the season, people are still trying to figure out. Mono red really punishes people for stumbling. So it's always kind of that kind of cyclical thing where at the beginning of a set, the mono aggressive decks are very good. And then as control kind of gets its tools together, or like mid-range decks kind of understand what do we need to have in terms of removal or interaction, stuff like that, then we kind of see a decline slightly. Best of 1 also does favor more aggressive decks, so that kind of coincides with that. Mono white humans, Selesnya enchantment, so 3 decks that we saw previous are still putting up reasonable results. Fairies coming in at 5% along with Golgari midrange. And the Golgari midrange deck, I just put up a video on best of 3 gameplay with it. I actually think that deck's really good in best of 3. In best of 1, it's a little iffy. The configurations of the ways people were building it, I don't think were good in the best of 1 version. But if you're interested in seeing that, it also kind of put up some results. There's a fairly large Japanese tournament over the yesterday, I think, and it put up 2 spots, I think, in the top 8, at least 1 top 8, and then maybe 2. And then just kind of looking at kind of the trends, like it's still early, but normally what we'll do is we go through trends and kind of like map out to see what's increasing, what's decreasing. But the set's only 4 days old, so the line's very small right now. So we're going to jump in, like I said, just kind of going off the bat, your stock like mono red list that was the popular last time, the mono white humans list, they're still doing well. If you want those deck lists, check out any of the previous videos. Over the course of the summer, it's pretty much 1 and 2. So I'm going to kind of highlight a different build of mono red. So this had a couple percentage points lower, but does feature some of the new cards. And a card that I think is very good is Godric Cloaked Reveler. 3 mana, 3/3 haste. It has the celebration mechanic. So if 2 permanents enter the battlefield that turn, it becomes a 4/4 flyer with fire breathing. So pay red mana, give it 1+ power as many times as you have red mana. It's playing some of the Harry's Warcrafting, the kind of burn package as it was. It's also playing Charming Scoundrel. I think this card's also very good. 2 mana, 1/1 haste, but then gives you a bunch of different abilities depending on the point of the game. Late game, if you have a lot of lands in hand, you kind of flood, discard that land, draw some cards. Could get you a treasure to help you ramp, or create a Wicked token. So it's an aura that equips the creature, gives them +1 power, and when the aura goes into the graveyard, they lose a life. Charming Scoundrel on its own, either through the treasure or the token, creates 2 permanents coming into play, so it self-triggers the Godric, so kind of value there. And the other new card in the deck is Monstrous Rage. I've been playing this in Wizards and Historic as well. Really, really good version of these kind of pump effects. So it gives +2/0 until the end of turn, but it also creates a monster roll token. And that one's +1 power and trample. So if you put it on like a prowess creature, or you're just a large creature in like the wizard's deck, it's really good because then you stick it on like Dreadhorde Arcanist and then it always gets the buff, so then you can flash back 2 power things without even any additional pumps. Kind of same burn package within the deck itself. From there, so not necessarily all like new cards, but this version is playing a bunch of cards from Aftermath that we haven't seen too much of. So this is a mono black kind of mid-range deck, full Obliterator, full Shieldred, really wanting to run into mono red at 63%. You got your sweepers, but then we have Urborg Scavengers as a 2 of. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you exile a card from a graveyard, and then it put a counter on it. It basically mirrors any of the abilities of the cards that it exiles that way. So flying, lifelink, death touch, whatever it may be. It's also playing copies of Ayara's Oathsworn. This is a 2-mana menace, and I'm going to have to read this one because I have no clue what this card does. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, if it has fewer than 4 1/1 counters, put a 1/1 counter, then... Okay, so basically it grows, and then if you take off 4 counters, you get to search your library for a card. And then it's using things like Drown and Ichor with the Proliferate, so removal with that. Interesting version like with this deck is it's lacking a lot of early interaction, so it's really reliant on kind of your big hitters on the top end. Unsure how I feel about this one. I would have to see it in action. We then go to Azorius Control, what we're saying, kind of phrasing as whale control. So Horned Lock Whale is kind of the new hotness in the deck. So it's got the Lagoon Beach Adventure. So for 2 mana, you get to put target attacking creature on top or bottom of their library. Sorry, the owner chooses, but you get to kind of bounce and they have to decide what they want to do with it. It kind of tempos them, screws up their draw potentially, as we had with like Azorius Charm back in the day. And then you get a flash 6/6 with Ward 2. And if it enters during your opponent's turn, so you can't ambush Viper with this in the sense that you can't flash it in and block because it enters tapped on your opponent's turn, but still a really good like end of your opponent's step. Here's my 6/6, and then you start beating in with it. This version is also playing a copy of Ironcrag just as a ramp effect, along with Celestis, and then that plays really nice with Teferi since you can untap the artifacts for extra value. Your kind of go-to bread and butter: control threats, counter spells, Elspeth Smite, Soul Partition removal. Bunch of different card draw effects. Sunfall is your sweeper. And then Invasion of Arcavius. So it's a 5-mana battle. And then basically you can search for a card from either in your deck or in your library, your graveyard, and then also in sideboard. So you get this kind of a toolbox effect. So targeted removal, card draw, like sweepers, whatever it may be in that sense. So you're winning either with the Whale, the Emperor, or Myrex. It's the mana base. Then go to Boros Aggro, kind of a throwback to those old modified decks, like Boros Aggro decks with like Luminarch Aspirants. So we got our Impressionist of like Dusky Legion Duelist that gets larger. Sorry, whenever you put counters on, you get to draw cards. You're playing the Charming Scoundrel. You're playing Raging Battle Mouse. So this card makes it so your second spell each turn costs 1 less. And then the Celebration. If 2 or more permanents in the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1. So it's kind of going wide. You have like Regal Bunnicore that can get big. You can put counters on a bunch of different things with Siege Veteran. And then you kind of draw cards or just get beaters, stuff of that nature. Go wide token effects. And then you have Monstrous Rage for the trample kind of mixed in. So interesting kind of blend of your mono whites, mono reds with a modified sub theme to it. Speaking of counters, we got Selesnya Counters. So we got the boy Tough Cookie. Just look at that angry face. So 2/2 for 2, and they can animate non-creature artifacts into 4/4s itself as a food. You got Sir Ginger, the Meal Ender, 3/1 that gets trample if your opponent has a Planeswalker. And then whenever an artifact's put in the graveyard, you get to put counters on it. Patchwork Automaton gets bigger. Teething Wormlight gets bigger with artifacts. You have Scroll for protection. Ginger Brute for unblockable. Some removal in like Glass Casket. Elvish Archivist gets bigger with your artifacts as well. So a bunch of things that care about having artifacts coming in to get bigger. Mashiko for pumps, Ozolith to double the amount of counters and then put counters on things. And then you got like counters with the Simulacrum, and then Steel Seraph can give a whole bunch of different evasion types or like lifelink or whatever is necessary in the deck. We're also playing Royal Treatment, which is a new card. Lets you get hexproof till end of turn for a creature, so protection effect. That also gives a royal token, so +1 and ward 1. You then go to Rakdos, kind of rolls is what I'm calling this one. Rakdos Midrange. I like the rolls definition better because it's a little bit different than just a traditional Rakdos Midrange. So you're looking to leverage Lord Skitter's Blessing. 2 mana enchantment, enters the battlefield, you put a Wicked counter or roll token. So again, that's when it +1/1, and then when it goes into the graveyard, they lose a life. Beginning of your drop step, if you have an enchanted creature, you lose a life, draw an additional card. It's not a May, so you're taking 3 damage in the face of a Shieldred on your opponent's side of the board. Spiteful Hexmage is kind of a negative where you get the cursed roll token onto one of your creatures that they come base power 1/1. But there's a lot of ways to sack things. You have bargain effects with like Torch the Tower that can bargain something to deal 3 damage. The Annihilating Glare, well, this one cares about artifacts or creatures, but you have your artifacts with like the blood tokens. Charming Scoundrel also has the ability to create rolls, so you can kind of offset the rolls. Each creature can only have 1 roll. But again, as we mentioned with the other effects, there's also the bargain ability with Back for Seconds, which is kind of the reanimation effect for your cheap creatures if bargained. And then you have Braids, which so you can sack those like various roll tokens, force them there, artifacts, whatever it may be. And then Twisted Fealty is a threaten effect that also gives you a Wicked counter on it. Then we're kind of going into the lower win rate decks. So we have Gruul Gruul Aggro. So this is kind of a modified sub-theme. So you have things like, again, the Charming Scoundrel. So we're seeing things like Charming Scoundrel being featured in a number of decks. So it's usually something that you look at for what should I craft potentially. A card that's viable in multiple strategies. What you want to try to do is avoid, especially if you're limited on wild cards, getting very niche cards. So something that maybe only fits in one archetype. An example of that would be something like the Ozolith. This would fit a very specific deck that you would have to play, where this is, your mono red deck, your Boros deck, this Gruul deck. So this has got your similar Monsters Rage, Royal Treatment, Kumano. It's also played Ruby Daring Tracker, ramp creature that then later game if you have a creature power 4 or greater, it gets become a 3/4 itself. Miglos in here, Voldaren Thrillseeker, then you got Halana and Alana, and Thundering Raiju. So I was a little dismissive of this deck, and I still think I'm kind of that opinion. It has a tough time there's no removal in this deck. You're very contingent on your opening draws, and like you're gonna run down some people sometimes, but like your 4-drop getting hit by Cut Down, or like Go for the Throat, or Lightning Strike, any kind of iteration there does kind of hurt. The one thing that might make this deck a little bit more viable now is the mana ramp on 2 into your 4-drop. No, additionally, this has haste, so you can protect it the same turn it comes down. So that might be enough to kind of give this a little bit more viability. But we also don't have a creature land here. I'm a little hesitant with this deck. So Dimir Faeries was one of the more popular decks. This is the highest win rate version of the deck I found. Most are in like the 40%. I think that you're missing some good creatures to this deck. The spells are very good. So things like Fairy Fencing, you should be playing 4 of. You should be playing for the Spell Stutter. You should be playing 4 of the Masterminds. This version of the deck is fairly disjointed. There may be some iteration, but it seems like it's very kind of all over the place. Some are playing the Sleepless Cleric, the 1 mana 3/3 with stun counters. People are liking it. I don't like that card. I gotta just play with it more, but I found it really awkward during early access. The Sleep Curse Fairy. It was a bad late draw. Early game, I don't know. You have to invest so much mana to actually make it viable. So this is the fairies list. This again, like a 3/4 that doesn't really impact the board for 4 mana. The Spell Coven. Again, this is I think the Take It Back if it was returning permanent, or like bounce, or like from like on the stack or on the field. It could be different, but with this iteration, it's only target spell, and then so that's on the stack as opposed to like any spell or permanent. And then the discard, again, you're not getting great stats. I'm just kind of medium on this deck. Like the looter doesn't really fit the rest of the theme of the deck. Why you really want to be looting in this deck doesn't really make sense. And then just becoming like a copy of a creature doesn't really make that much sense. The big thing with this is like you want to be a flash deck, but they haven't equipped you with a lot of flash. I think there's the basis here, and then when we get like the Lauren set, the next set that's coming out, that could supplement. Lauren is where like Bitter Blossom came, and we got a bunch of things there. I think that can help out there, but I don't think this makes sense to play this over the existing kind of Gruul, Dimir mid-range tempo style shells. And then we also have, so this Esper Control deck was like earlier was playing pretty well. It was like mid 50s, and since then has fallen quite a bit. I was actually surprised it had like that high of a win rate, just given like you're playing Staff of Completion in a format where mono red is 15% of your matches. Seems very aggressive in that sense, compared to like blue white control. So you're playing a lot of Planeswalkers. I think there's like iterations of Esper for sure, but not playing 4 of Ashiok, like that volume. The Virtue of Persistence was really good in the Golgari deck, in the best of 3 version. So I think there's like things you can do here, but just this configuration, like you can't play this in best of 1. I don't think this is something you want to play anyways. But I think you just want to be like, maybe depopulate, have your more early removal. The Revelry is fine, but like an offer you can't refuse. I don't understand why that's being played. So there's things here, but I think it just needs to be refined a little bit better. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing in the comments. Catch you next time. Thanks for watching.